Hello everyone, welcome back to another What's for Dinner video, or welcome if you were new. My name is Veronica, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you some super simple, easy meals that I fixed for my family this past week that we absolutely loved. So I hope this video can give you and your family some meal inspiration. Let's get to cooking! First up, we had chicken pot pie casserole. I started off by preparing my biscuits. I used 1 can of biscuits that contained 8 biscuits in the can, and I just placed those on my baking sheet. This was our first time trying this recipe, and my family loved it, and it was so easy to make. It has been a lot cooler here in East Tennessee lately, and so we've really enjoyed all of these warm comfort meals. I then placed my biscuits in the oven that I had preheated to 375 degrees, and I baked them for 8 minutes. While my biscuits were in the oven, I melted 2 tablespoons of butter in a large skillet. Once the butter was melted, I then added in a 32-ounce bag of frozen mixed vegetables to my skillet, and then I just gave that a good stir. I then placed my lid on my skillet and I let that cook between 10 to 15 minutes, just until my vegetables was heated up, and I just stirred that occasionally. Once my vegetables were heated up, I then added in 2 cups of milk. I then added in my chicken. I used a 3-pound rotisserie chicken that I had bought from Sam's Club just to make this recipe a lot easier. I then added in 2 10.5-ounce cans of cream of chicken soup. I then added in a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder and some salt and pepper to taste. I then stirred all of those ingredients together to make sure everything was well combined, and then I just let that heat up until it was nice and hot and bubbly. When those ingredients started to bubble up, I then sprayed a large baking dish with some nonstick spray. And then I poured all of those ingredients into my baking dish. I then placed my partially cooked biscuits on top of all of those ingredients. Once I got all of my biscuits added, I then poured 2 tablespoons of melted butter on top of my biscuits. I then placed it in the oven that was still preheated to 375 degrees, and I baked it for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, I then placed some aluminum foil over my baking dish, and then I placed it back in the oven and I cooked it for an additional 10 minutes. And this is what it looks like whenever it comes out of the oven. Like I said, my whole family enjoyed this. This was delicious. It was a nice, wonderful, warm meal on a cool day. And here is my bowl. This night for dinner, I fixed a new recipe of homemade hamburger helper. This recipe serves 8 people, so if you have a smaller or a larger family, you can adjust this recipe to meet your family's needs. I started out by cooking 2 pounds of lean ground beef in a large Dutch oven, and whenever my beef was finished cooking, I just took that and drained all of the grease off of it and returned it back to my stovetop. I then added in 2 tablespoons of ketchup, 2 teaspoons of Dijon mustard, 2 teaspoons of hot sauce, which is optional. It does not make it hot, it just adds extra flavor. 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of seasoned salt, 1 teaspoon of pepper, and a half of a teaspoon of salt. I then poured in 7 cups of low sodium beef broth. I then stirred all of those ingredients together to make sure everything was well combined, and then I just let that heat up for just a few minutes between low and medium heat before I added in my pasta. I have tried a few different homemade hamburger helper recipes before, and so far this has been my family's favorite, and it's so easy to make. I then added in 3 cups of elbow macaroni pasta. And then I just gave that another good stir and made sure that my pasta was well covered in the liquid. I then placed my lid on my Dutch oven and I let that simmer for 15 minutes until my pasta was done, and then I just stirred that occasionally. When my pasta was finished cooking, I just removed that from the heat, and then I added in 1 cup of sour cream and I stirred that together. I then returned it back to my stovetop and I added in 4 cups of shredded mild cheddar cheese. I then stirred in the cheese, and whenever the cheese was melted, it was ready to serve. This homemade hamburger helper was delicious. It was a win for my family, and I love how easy it was to make and took very simple ingredients. And here it is in my bowl. Next up, I fixed creamy broccoli pasta. The first thing that I do is melt a stick of butter in a large Dutch oven. After my butter is melted, I then add in 8 cloves of minced garlic. And then I let the butter and the garlic cook together for about a minute. This recipe serves 8 people, so if you have a smaller or a larger family, you can adjust this recipe to meet your family's needs. I then add in a 32-ounce container of reduced sodium chicken broth. I have fixed this recipe once before and my family loved it, and we also loved it this time. This is a wonderful and very easy one-pot meal. After I get all of my chicken broth added, I then add in 2.5 cups of half and half. I then add in all of my seasonings. I start out with a half a teaspoon of onion powder, then a half a teaspoon of dried thyme, a half a teaspoon of pepper, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, and 1 teaspoon of dried parsley. I then stir all of those ingredients together, and then I'll let that come to a boil, and whenever it comes to a boil, I then add in 1 pound of pasta shells. I then give that a good stir, and then I place my lid on my Dutch oven and I let that cook for about 6 minutes, and I just stir it occasionally. After letting my pasta cook for 6 minutes, I then add in 2 12-ounce bags of frozen broccoli florets. If you like to use less broccoli, you can do that, or you can add as much as you like. But we find that 2 12-ounce bags is really good. I then give that a good stir, and then I just make sure that my broccoli is well covered in the liquid, and then I place my lid back on my Dutch oven, and then I let that cook for an additional 10 minutes or so, just until my pasta is done and my broccoli is heated up. Whenever my pasta is done, I then remove that from the heat. I then add in 4 teaspoons of lemon juice, and then I just give that a quick stir. I then add in 1.5 cups of grated Parmesan cheese, and I add that in slowly and just stir that as I'm adding the cheese in. And after all of the cheese is added, it is ready to serve. And here it is in my bowl. Like I said, this is an absolutely delicious one-pot meal. This night for dinner, I made crock pot vegetable beef soup. I started off by cooking my meat the night before because I fixed a very large crock pot full of vegetable beef soup and I wanted to make sure that my meat was completely done. So right before I went to bed, I added 2.5 pounds of stew meat to my crock pot. Anytime I fix vegetable beef soup, I always make enough so we can have leftovers for a couple of days. After I get all of my meat added, I add enough water just to cover my meat, and then I just season that with some salt and pepper. And then I add in 1 large sliced up sweet onion. I then place my lid on my crock pot and I cook that on low until I wake up early the next morning, and then I add my remaining ingredients. Early the next morning, I started off by adding in 2 12-ounce bags of sweet petite carrots. I then added in 4 chopped up stalks of celery, 5 large peeled and diced russet potatoes. If you have a smaller family or you don't like a lot of leftovers, you can definitely cut this recipe down. Like I said, we enjoy the leftovers of vegetable beef soup. I then add in a can of green beans, a can of golden sweet whole kernel corn, a 28-ounce can of diced tomatoes and tomato juice, a can of sweet peas. The good thing about vegetable beef soup is you can kind of play around with it. If you don't like stew meat, you can use hamburger meat, or if you don't like a certain vegetable, you can leave that out and use whatever vegetable that you like. I then add in about 1/4 cup of tomato paste, and then I just give everything a good stir. After fixing this, I realized how much I need a larger crock pot. I told you all that I filled this crock pot to the top. I also sprinkled in some garlic powder to taste. If you don't like garlic powder, you can use your favorite seasoning. And then I place my lid on my crock pot and I let that cook on low for an additional 6 hours or so, just until my potatoes and carrots are tender. I also fixed some Martha White sweet yellow cornbread to have as a side, and this meal turned out perfect. It was a wonderful meal to have on a cool night here in East Tennessee. That's it for today's video. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.